We're going to begin by talking about percent of change. We've been talking about percents, mostly percent proportions. And we're still going to be setting up a proportion. It's just this time we're setting up a proportion to find the change. Okay? And our answer is going to be a percent. That's why we call it a percent of change. So before we start learning anything new, I'd like to review some things about percents. First of all, we need to know that percent is part of 100. So if we have 62%, that is 62 out of 100. Okay? A percent can also be written as a ratio comparing a number to 100, which is what we've been doing when we have x over 100, more specifically, percent over 100. Okay, we've been writing that as 62 over 100. That's another way to write a percent. All right. To understand percent of change, you need to know what it's talking about. Okay? And it is talking about, or what it is the ratio of the amount of change to the original amount. A ratio is a comparison of two things. In this ratio, we're comparing the amount of change to the original amount. And you can see here, I have drawn a ratio that has change over original. Okay, they're being compared. The formula we will be using for percent of change looks like this. Let's just look at the formula for a second. It says change over original equals percent over 100. The same kind of setup we've been using. Okay? But the thing that makes this different is this part here, the change. And before you start this problem, you need to find the change. And I'm going to tell you how to do that. Okay? The change is the difference in the new and the original. Difference means to subtract. So you need to subtract the new and the original. And you can do it big one minus small one. It doesn't matter in which order, as long as you put the big one on top minus the small one. If new amount is higher, it's called a percent increase. If the new amount is lower, it's called a percent decrease. And that's something important to know, and the problem will be asking about those kinds of things. And the last thing down here is original. Original is the starting amount. It's how much you began with. Okay? So the most important thing that you need to have written down in all of today's notes is this right here. Change over original equals percent over 100. That's the most important thing for today's notes. Okay? Next, I have some steps. These are the steps that you need to follow in order to complete a percent of change problem. Step 1 says determine if it's a percent increase or a percent decrease. Does it go up or does it go down? Step 2 says subtract to find the amount of change. This step is the number one thing that students forget to do. Make sure you're subtracting. Underline that subtract. Bold it, highlight it, something. Make sure you do that step. Step 3 says use the formula. That formula, change over original. Percent over 100. Use that formula. And then you solve it like a proportion, just like we've been doing all week. The only thing that makes it different is this part right here. We've got to subtract to find the amount of change. Now I'd like to work through some example problems with you to kind of show you how this works. I have a couple of them I'm going to do. I'm going to start off with something pretty easy. Example 1. It says, a shirt was on sale for $7. It originally cost $15. What is the percent of change? Well, we know this is a percent of change problem because it says it right here. It says it right here at the end of the problem. Percent of change. That means that we're going to be using that setup I've been talking about, change over original equals percent over 100. And step 1 said to tell whether it's an increase or a decrease. So if we had a shirt that's on sale for $7, it originally cost $15. Well, it went down in price, so we're dealing with a decrease. Okay? How much it decreased is our change. To find the change in this problem, we're going to do 15 take away 7. Okay? 15 take away 7 gives us 8. And we know that that goes right here on the top where the change goes. On the bottom goes the original. How much did the shirt originally cost? And that's going to be the 15. And then we're going to finish setting up our proportion here. What makes this different from what we did yesterday is before we solve our proportion, we had to find the change. Okay? It's not just taking the numbers in the problem. You have to find the change. To finish this problem, okay, since we found the change, we've set it up, we want to cross multiply 8 times 100 and then divide by 15, and we end up with 53.3 repeating percent. We're going to round that to 53%. X equals 53%. And that's a percent decrease. We found that out in the beginning. Example number 2 is a little different. Still a percent of change problem. Says that in the problem, percent of change. But it's a little different. Let's read through and listen closely for the differences. We got 3 new students in our class. If the class now totals 27, what is the percent of change? The percent of change, the words give it away that we're dealing with a percent of change problem. The first thing we want to do is determine whether this is an increase or a decrease. And since we got 3 new students added into our class, we know it's an increase. Okay, we're going to be using that same formula, change over original equals percent over 100. Go ahead and fill my 100 in. The first thing we need to do is determine how much it changed. And in this problem it says we got 3 new students. So we know it changed 3. We didn't have to subtract this time. It told us in the problem what the change was. That's what makes this one different. And our class is now 27. Well, how much was it originally? That's what goes on the bottom, and that's going to be 24. I got that 24 because I did 27 take away 3. Okay? And then I'm going to set up my proportion, cross multiply 3 times 100, divide by 24, and I get x equals 12.5%. And that 12.5 is a percent increase. Example 2 is different than example 1 because it told us the change in the problem, and we had to use the change to find the original. Our last example is example number 3. Example number 3 talks about a sweater. It says, last year a sweater sold for $56. This year, the same sweater sells for $60. Find the percent of change in the cost of the sweater. And then you should round your answer to the nearest whole. We know we're dealing with percent of change because it says so in the problem, percent of change. Okay. Reading through the problem, it was 56 last year, it's 60 this year. We know it's an increase. And we're going to use our same setup to find out the percent of increase in this problem, percent of change. the change here, well, it went from 56 up to 60. You can even count that and find out that it's 4. You have to find the change or you're not going to get this problem correct. Originally, that's the last year price, it sold for 56. If you don't put 56 on the bottom, you're not going to end up with the correct answer. We're going to cross multiply and divide, and you end up with 7.142857. Well, it keeps going. We need to take this and round it to the nearest whole, because that's what it says. So this is going to be 7%. That is a lesson on percent of change. Make sure that you find the change, like I did here for the 4, every single time. The number one reason students miss these questions is they don't find the change.